So we are starting a new topic at long last. So we're going to do one more topic during our study session during this, summer learning series. And the topic that we're going to start today and do for the next bit of time is called Akedas Yitzchak, which means the binding of Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. So we have Avraham, and then we have Yitzhak. Avraham is the first of our forefathers, and Yitzhak is his son, and he is the second of the forefathers. So we were discussing until now, we were talking about, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, and that whole story. After that, we have the whole story of Noah, where the people were not listening and they weren't, behaving, because as we learned in the very, very first class in our introduction to the whole book of Beraishis, we learned that the first 1,000 years, the first day of creation was parallel to 1,000 years. And we learned that the first 1,000 years, Hashem was in the mode of chesed. And chesed is the idea of just giving without limits and giving everything in abundance, no rules. And this idea of no rules, that is what led them to sin. And because there were no rules and they were able to just do whatever they wanted, they got into trouble. We do need structure. And so what happened is they, and then they sinned, and then Hashem brought the famous story of the flood. We're not going to go into that. I had to pick and choose. So, but after that, it's 10 generations. So it's 10 generations from Adam until Noah, and the ark, and that whole story. And then there's another 10 generations until the first Jew, which is Avraham. So we did the first man. We discussed the first man and woman and that whole story. And then we are discussing now the first Jew, and one of the very, very important things in his life. Okay, so to give you some background, Avraham was the son of a man named Terach, and Terach was a idol worshiper, and that was his life. He had a store of idols. He was, very immensely immersed in this, and that was his whole life. And Avram, on his own, as a young child, discovered Hashem. He looked around and he said, who made this beautiful world? How is this possible? What's going on? This couldn't have happened on its own. And he went around and he looked and he says, maybe it's the sun. And then he said, no, but the sun goes away at night. Oh, maybe it's the moon. No, but the moon goes away during the day. Maybe it's the mountains. And he went through all these different things until he finally came to the realization, no, there is a higher purpose than everything, something I can't see, which is called Hashem. And his mission in life was to teach everybody about Hashem and to promote Hashem's existence and the belief in Hashem. And his nature was chesed. As being the first Jew, he was chesed, and actually Yitzchak, the second, of our patriarchs, is the second of our avais, our fathers, he was Devorah, which is more severity, and then Yaakov, Jacob, the third one, is kind of a mix, and so it goes on. Those are the two. Remember, we said when we discussed the midas, when we discussed the attributes that everyone has, we said chesed is the main general one that everything stems from. On the right side, on the more outward giving side, and Gevurah, severity, is the root of all midas, character traits, on the left side of more like restraining and holding back. So this is Avraham. Avraham is a person who his whole life is dedicated to teaching everybody about Hashem, and he was full of chesed. He would invite everybody to his house and give them food and meals. And then, oh, you want to, they would say, oh, thank you. He would say, don't thank me. There's really a Hashem in the world. And he would teach them about Hashem. So he would feed their body and their soul. And this is what his life was about. So two things to keep in mind. He discovered Hashem on his own. He's the first Jew. And he has a very strong connection with Hashem, and he is a person of chesed. So now what we're discussing, particularly here in chapter 22 in Parakaf Beis of the book of Beraishis, of Genesis, is we're discussing Yitzchak being offered as a sacrifice by Hashem. Hashem commands him, and Hashem says, you shall bring up your son to be slaughtered on the mountain. Okay? And so we're going to discuss this. So the first thing is we're going to read the psukim inside. But before we even go into that, this is considered a test, which we'll see in the words of the pasuk. And this is Abraham's 10th test. Now, he was 137 years old when this happened. Remember, he had Yitzhak when he was 100 years old because, well, maybe you don't remember because we haven't learned it, but he was, Sarah was not able to have children, and Avraham and Sarah didn't have children, and then Sarah gave her maidservant, and Avraham married Hagar, the maidservant, and had a son called Yishmael, and finally, Hashem granted, when Avraham was 100 years old, that he merited to have a child with Sarah, which is a whole tremendous story in itself that we're not going to really go into now. But obviously, it was miraculous because she was too old and she was already past menstruation. And Hashem caused her at 90 years old, to start menstruating again and give birth to a child. So she has Yitzchak. And 37 years later, okay, when Avraham is 137 and Yitzhak is 37 years old, so some people think like, oh, he's this little 5-year-old. No, he was a grown man of 37 years old. This is when Hashem tested him and gave him this challenge. I want you to sacrifice your son. And to see, is Avraham going to listen? So this happened on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the Jewish year. 3 days before he commanded it on the 27th of Elul. And this is when it happened on Rosh Hashanah. So as I said, this is the 10th test. So very quickly and very briefly, I'm just going to go through the other 9 tests, and then we're going to go inside the psukim. So the first test he has was, as I said, Avraham was the son of a very big idol worshiper whose name was Terach. And Avraham didn't believe in it because he already discovered Hashem and he wasn't interested. And Terach was very upset. As a matter of fact, one time Terach went away and he told Avraham to watch his store. And Avraham couldn't handle this. These are idols. And, Hashem doesn't let us serve idols and they're false. And so he chopped all the idols except for the biggest idol there. And he had an axe in that big idol's hand. And his father came home and said, what did you do? How come you chopped those? He said, I didn't do anything. Look at the big idol. The big idol has an axe in his hand. He did. Well, the big idol can't do anything. He's not. He goes, so then why do you believe in him if he can't do anything? Well, Terach was furious. He was fed up with his son Avraham. And he brought him to the king. He brought him to King Nimrod. And Nimrod said, well, he deserves to be killed. And so he put him in a furnace to kill him. Avraham was placed in a furnace by Nimrod because his father Terach said he cannot be serving idols and this is not okay. And then what happened was he survived. He came out alive. So that was the first test, which Hashem miraculously made him, but that was a test. He had the choice. They said, if you want to serve idols, if you don't, you're going in the furnace. But if you want to serve idols, you're scot-free. You can just go. And he might have died. I mean, he should have died. So that was test number one. As a matter of fact, his brother Haran, they asked him afterwards, and what about you? And he said, okay, Avram survived. So he went in, but he didn't make it out because he didn't really believe. So that was test number one. Test number two, Hashem says, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go out of your land, and you have to go to the land of Israel. And he had to leave where he was familiar with, his birthplace, and go travel somewhere else, unknowingly, not knowing what's going to go on. And that's a very hard thing to do. So that was his second test. The third test was there was a famine and there was hunger, and that was a challenge. The fourth one is when they came to Mitzrayim, when they came to Egypt to get food, Sarah was taken by Parai. And again, that was a test, his wife being taken away from him and how he would handle that. Then we have number five is he had to save his nephew Light. As I said, his brother passed away. So he sort of, took care of his nephew. And he was captured. There was a big war between a group of 4 kings and 5 kings. And he had to save Light, his nephew, who was captive. And then the sixth test is it's called the Bris Bein HaBesarim, which means the covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people. And Hashem told Avraham at this time that his children are going to be slaves in Egypt. And then eventually, they're going to not be slaves and they're going to come out of exile and they're going to, go to Israel and they're going to be as many as the stars and the dust, they're going to be multiply. But he did tell him that they're going to be slaves. And that was also a test if he would agree to this covenant where he's telling him that your children are going to suffer. And then the seventh one is that he had to have a bris milah. He had to be circumcised at 99 years old, which is not an easy thing at all, because, it's very painful. Most people have it young as babies, and he was 99. And the older you are, the more dangerous the surgery is and the more difficult. And then we have number 8. Sarah was taken by a king named Avimelech. And then we have number 9, where he was told to send away Yishmael, which is his son that he had with Hagar, who became his wife when Sarah said, look, I'm not having children here. Why don't you take my maidservant Hagar instead? But then he ended up being very wild and not a good influence on their younger son, Yitzchak. And therefore, Sarah said, I don't think this is good. I think we have to send him away. And Abraham said, but this is my son. I don't want to send him away. So she said, well, why don't we ask Hashem? Something, I always think about that story. That would be so cool if I could was unsure of something and I could just dial hey, Hashem, what should I do? But Avram and Sarah were both prophets and they were able to converse. And what did Hashem say? Listen to whatever Sarah's telling you, listen to her. You need to send Yishmael away. And that was a test, is he going to listen? Is he going to just send Yishmael away, his dear beloved son? And, of course he did. So now we're up to test number 10, which tops them all. Let's look at the psukim so you could see it for yourself. But this is really quite the test. So, okay, 1 second. Okay, so hopefully, so everyone sees, it says the binding of Yitzchak, which is Chumash Beraishis, chapter 22, for anyone who has a Chumash and would like to, follow along. I have all the psukim here, so you don't really, need that, but okay. Okay, sorry, this is not somehow the portion of screen. Let me adjust it. Okay. It's not showing my whole screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, is that good? Now you can see the whole slide? Okay. So I divided it into sections. The first section is Pasuk Aleph and Beis, verse 1 and 2. And this is Hashem commands Avraham. He's commanding him, he's telling him. So it says, Vayehi achar hadivarim ha'ela. And it came to pass after these things. Vehelikim nisa es Avraham. And Hashem tested Avraham. Vayomer elav Avraham. Vayomer hineni. And he, meaning Hashem, said to him, to Avraham, he called his name, starting a conversation, Avraham. And he said, Avraham responds, here I am. Okay? So basically it just says, after what happened before, now God is testing Avraham. And so far, all he does is he calls his name, and Avraham says, yeah, I'm here. I'm ready to listen to you, God. Pasuk Beis, Vayomer, and he says, Kachna es bincha es yechidcha. Please take your son, your only one. Okay, so even though he had two sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael, he's saying your only one, meaning the only one that you have from Sarah. That's what it's referring to. I want you to take Yitzchak. And he goes on, Asher ahavta, that you love. Es Yitzchak, Isaac. And what should you do? So you're supposed to take your most beloved only son, and what are you supposed to do? V'lech lecha al eretz haMoriah, and you should go to the land of Moriah. V'haleyu sham la'olah, and you should bring him up there as a burnt offering, as a sacrifice. Now you have to understand, part of what Avraham would do when he was teaching everybody about Hashem, he taught, it was very popular that people would sacrifice their children. And he said, no, we don't do that. That's not the way of a Jew. That's not the way Hashem wants it. And we are not supposed to sacrifice a child. And here Hashem is telling him, everything that you've been preaching, go against and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. So there's two challenges here. What are the two different challenges? If someone could unmute themselves and share with everybody, what do you think the two challenges are here?
Whether he listens to God and whether he kills his son.
Right. So the challenge, but in other words, yes, the test is, are you going to listen to God and kill your son? But why is that challenging? Why is that hard? Like if God said, okay, could you paint the sidewalk red? It's not very challenging. Okay, sure, I'll listen. Why is this challenging? Why is this difficult for him to listen to?
Well, it's very consistent with all the teachings that Hashem has given, and also it's inconsistent with the promise that he'll make a great nation out of him. If he kills his son, where will that nation come from?
Excellent. So it's inconsistent. Thank you, Sarah. It's inconsistent with everything that he's been teaching. He's been teaching everybody to serve Hashem, not to sacrifice children. That's point number one. And it also contradicts what God said. What did God say? God said, he promised him, Ki Yitzchak yakar l'chazera, from Yitzchak, from Isaac specifically, you are going to have a whole nation come out of him. You're going to have grandchildren from Yitzchak. Well, if he kills him, how's he going to have grandchildren? He's not even married yet. And these two are obviously, so those two are, it contradicts everything. That's like challenge number one, which subdivides into two. It contradicts everything I've been teaching, my entire nature, and everything I stand for. And it contradicts our agreement with each other. And then point number two, which is so obvious that none of you are even saying it, is like, obviously, why is this difficult when he is commanding him, kill your son? Because how could any parent kill their son. That's like, you're asking the impossible of a parent to do that. So that's what he says, you shall sacrifice him. So these words, sacrifice him, is challenge in big, bold, help. I just listed you 9 challenges, 9 tests, which were all really challenging. But this one now is like, tops them all and is way more challenging than the other ones on a level of his belief and his connection to Hashem and contradicting everything he believes and stands for. You see, the first one, when he was willing to be burned in the furnace, yes, he had to sacrifice himself. First of all, it was himself, not his son. Killing someone else and your son, a whole different level. But also, it was just going further into what he believed. It was just continuing, I believe that God is the end all. So I'm going to sacrifice myself. This is contradicting everything he's been teaching about God. And he says you have to bring him up as a offering, al achad haharim, on one of the mountains, asher amar elacha, that I will tell you. So he's keeping it pretty vague here. So he's emphasizing in the beginning, take your most beloved and your best and kill him. And I'm keeping it vague. On one of the mountains, I'm going to tell you. Again, that uncertainty. The only thing that's certain here is my most beloved treasure I have to give up. And I have to go against everything I ever stood for. And anything that I feel, my nature is chesed, is giving, is kindness. And I have to go against everything now and do this. And it's still vague, like, oh, one of the mountains, keep the test even more challenging by not explaining what it is. Okay, so we're going to focus on these 2 psukim. But before we do that, I'm just going to give you like a kind of sneak peek. We're not going to read everything inside, but just a sneak peek on the whole topic. So after that, we have Avram's preparation and journey, where we have Avram's preparation and journey, where he gets up early and he saddles his donkey and he brings his two servants with him, and they come. That's their journey, and he doesn't actually take the 2 young men with him. They were just to accompany him along the journey. They don't come along. And then we have Avram and Yitzchak's journey. They go themselves now to the mountain specifically. It was a few days. So the beginning part, they had the lads come, but now when they're actually going to go up the mountain, that's going to be private. He doesn't want them to know what's going on. And the conversation between the 2 of them, that, Isaac is saying like, oh, I'm here, like there's the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb? Where's the sacrifice? But Yitzchak has no idea what's going on. And, and how they both, once he even finds out, they both go together, etc. Then we have the actual binding of Yitzchak, where, Abraham actually takes the knife and he's ready to slaughter his son. And then the angel of God calls out and says, Abraham, Abraham. And he tells him, do not actually kill him. You brought him up. That's enough. I see that you were ready to do it. And that's okay. And Abraham was so invested and ready to do this that he was like, what do you mean? I have to listen to Hashem. He's like, no, Hashem doesn't want that. And then he sees a ram. He's looking, I have to bring something. I can't just, I have to bring a sacrifice. And he finds a ram. And he brings that as a burnt offering instead. And then we have all the rewards and the blessings, and where Hashem says he's going to multiply the Jews as the stars of the heavens and the sand of the seashore, and that everyone, all the nations are going to be blessed, because Avram did this. And then that's it. Avram goes back and he returns to Beersheba. Okay, so let's go back to here, because this is what we're going to be focusing on right now. And that is that, again, Hashem commands Avraham to take his most beloved son and go. Okay, so the words that we're going to focus on right now is First, we're going to focus on these words, Vayihi achar advarim ha'ela. And it came to pass after these things.
Devorah, you're muted.
Sorry,
You're
I'm
muted.
so sorry about that. Okay.
Okay.
So, okay. So we're going to discuss this, and it was after. Okay, before we discuss it, actually, any questions that anybody has? What after you got the story in a nutshell, and what questions do you have?
Yeah, this is Shane. I have a question. So, so we're talking about Yaakov, right?
No, we're talking about Avraham and Yitzchak, Abraham and Isaac.
Okay, so Isaac knew all of the things that was going to happen in the future. But he doesn't operate in the Torah as if he knows the future, like the famine, like the whole story with Yosef.
Well,
right?
who said he knew I mean, I don't know if he knew everything.
Okay, because I thought that was a point that you were bringing out, that Hashem told him that this is what was going to happen.
No, when he told him, first of all, he told it to Abraham, not to Yitzchak.
Oh, okay.
And when he told it to Abraham, he just said that they're going to go to Egypt and they're going to be exiled and they're going to be, but he didn't necessarily, he didn't tell him like every detail, he just gave him like sort of a general picture. It's interesting. We don't really know, when Hashem, sometimes there's different stories where, you go to like a great rabbi who has what we call Ruach HaKodesh, which means divine spirit, and he's able to see things that we're not able to see. And, sometimes they say like, oh, don't do this, don't go on the airplane, or, and you say like, why couldn't you just tell me the whole picture? And it's, sometimes the rabbis answered, I didn't know everything. I was given a glimpse at this angle, and I didn't necessarily see the whole thing. I only was able to see what Hashem granted me to see. So they don't necessarily, get everything.
Got it. Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, Natalie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there are two problems here. First, how come Avraham didn't ask God or challenge him or say to God, this is my only child. What you're asking me to do is incongruent with what I'm teaching everyone.
Right.
Okay, how can you force me to do something like this when I'm teaching people not to sacrifice children?
Excellent. So we're definitely going to go into that over, over these few classes. We're going to go into exactly what Natalie's talking about. Like, why didn't Avram challenge it? Why didn't he answer back? What was the right thing? Was he supposed to answer back? Was he not? Okay, excellent. Okay, what's your second question?
Second one is, he didn't say, I'm going to make a great nation until after the sacrifice.
No, well, he promised him in chapter 15 in the brisbane of Basarim, in the covenant, he did promise, that they were going to have many stars, and all of that was really already promised to him before. So
before his son was born,
he told him that. Oh, you're saying no, but I'm saying now his son is 37 years old.
Right.
So
when did he promise him that I'm going to make a great nation of yours?
Before, already in chapter 15, he already explained that they're going to be a large nation.
Could it be that Avraham would have thought, well, there will be somebody else beside Yitzhak.
No, he specifically said, Ki Yitzchak yikar l'chazera. He specifically said that it's going to be through Yitzchak. Yeah, he specifically said that.
Then absolutely, then he should have challenged God.
Then your first question becomes stronger now. Exactly.
Right.
Susan, go ahead. Thank you, Natalie.
See, I think that we need to look at Avraham as not only a father taking his son, but also as a prophet. And his soul was so connected to Hashem that I think the father part of him knew that his son was not going to be sacrificed, but he had to show everyone that he believed in God and only God. And that's why it was necessary for him to bind his son and go through the motions. It was critical in showing the people that he was a righteous person.
So you're presenting more of a comment than a question.
Yes, correct.
Yes. Okay, so just for anyone who joined a little bit late, we're discussing, the binding of Yitzchak, Hashem challenging and testing Avraham. Are you going to sacrifice your beloved only son? We are focusing right now on the first two passages, which I'm just putting up here. For whoever did it, we're not going to reread it, but for whoever joined late, you can read it now on the screen yourself. And we're just, before we delve into it, before we dive in, we want to just see if anyone has any questions. We went through the whole story here of, Avram prepares and journeys, and Avram Yitzhak go to the mountain, the binding of Yitzhak, where he actually binds him to prepare him for a sacrifice. He's about to, he takes the knife, but then he doesn't actually do it. And, the rewards and blessings, and, then he returns back. So we're before we actually go into these passages, we're just trying to, kind of process the story on a very surface level, because we haven't gone into it yet. And just see, is there, what questions do we have on this topic, so that we could, include that. And when your mind, thinks about and you kind of delve into it, with a question beforehand, you absorb the information in such a different way. So I always like, for everyone to kind of look and question it before we actually go into it. So any other questions on these passages or on the whole story in general? Okay, I guess if anyone has questions, they could, share them at any point in time. So right now we're going to focus, on these words right over here, which is Vayi achar dvar me'ela, and it came to pass after these things. And the word achar actually means right after. So if you look, you would think, okay, when it says it came after these things, if I want to know what it came right after, what would be like a simple, seemingly very simple thing for me to do? If I have a Chumash in front of me. If he says this happened right after these things, so what could I do? I could just look at what's right before me. What happened in chapter 21? And I guess that's what this is after. And why is it important for the Chumash to tell me that it's after this? The Chumash doesn't just say things like, there's always a reason. So what happens right before this? Right before this, it says, no, we're not talking about what happened right before this. The story that happened right before this was actually 12 years ago. And this is a covenant between Avraham and Abimelech. This is a covenant between Abraham and Abimelech, one of the kings. And he says, no, this is not what we're talking about. A, it's 12 years ago. B, like, what's the connection? So Rashi gives us two explanations. Now, whenever Rashi gives two explanations, it means that there is a problem with each of them. Each of them are not perfect. and therefore he has to give 2. So the first explanation that Rashi gives, he says, oh, this is after the story of a conversation that happened between Hashem and the Satan. And what was the story? The story was that the Satan said, from all the meals that Avraham has made, because as we said, he made many meals, he was always inviting people, and he never offered you a sacrifice. So the Satan always wants to badmouth the Jew and say how horrible he is so that Hashem could punish and get mad at him. So he says, oh, look at this. Oh, Avraham, you say he's your best Jew, your best man over here. Look at him. He did not. He made so many meals and he never offered you a sacrifice. So Hashem responded. Hashem said, his most valued thing is Yitzchak, his son, Isaac. And he would sacrifice him for me. Now, this story actually took place 35 years ago, when Yitzchak was only 2 years old, and Hashem's had this in his mind, like this idea. He wasn't going to do it then when Yitzchak was so young. But he says, in other words, how did this idea come about? After that story of the conversation between the Satan and Hashem. What's the problem with this answer? I said, whenever Rashi gives 2 answers, there's always a problem. What's the problem with this answer? I'll give you a hint. Achar means right after. When did I say the story took place?
On Rosh Hashanah.
Well, right. The binding of Isaac actually took place in Rosh Hashanah. But this story of between Hashem and the Satan, when did that take place? How many years ago?
35 years ago.
35 years ago. So this is not right after. So that's our problem with this answer. It's a great answer. Yes, this sparked Hashem. Ooh, I am going to ask Avraham. I'm going to show the Satan that Avraham is so loyal and so worthy, and he'll do anything, take even his most prized possession in the entire world and give it to me.
But isn't that also inconsistent? Because the entire history of Avram's service to Hashem, he's also always making altars and giving sacrifices.
Right, but he's saying that whenever he makes a meal, he's not offering the sacrifice at the meal. So he's saying when he's doing the meal, he should be offering the sacrifice at the meal, even though he's offering other ones. The Satan always tries to find something, because obviously Avraham is so righteous, it wasn't easy to find something. So he's trying to pick on this little detail, and he says to him, he's not giving me at the meal. He would give me anything, even his most prized possession. So we need the second explanation, because this was 35 years ago. So he says there was actually a conversation between Yitzchak and Yishmael, Avram's 2 sons, who were half brothers because they had different mothers. Yitzchak's mother was Sarah, and Yishmael's mother was Hagar. And Yishmael, similar to the Satan, was challenging Yitzchak. And he says to Yitzchak, I had a bris. I was circumcised at 13 years old. And I didn't protest. You had it at 8 days old. You had no choice. But I'm so much greater than you because I had a circumcision and gave, willingly part of my body to Hashem. And Yitzchak responded and he says, you're intimidating me with one limb. You gave part of one limb to Hashem. If Hashem would tell me to sacrifice my whole self, I would do it. So this conversation sparked Hashem to do Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak, at this specific time, right now. So the thought to do it was 35 years ago. That's why that's Rashi's first answer. But 1 second, that it's not right after that, right? it wasn't in close proximity. But when did he decide? The idea came up 35 years ago. But now he says, after his conversation with the Satan, he just said, I'm going to do it. He didn't know when. That's just an idea. And, and he says he decided to do it at this time after Yishmael and Yitzchak had this conversation. He says, now's the right time. Yitzchak said he's willing. This is the right time.
Yes, but again, wasn't Yishmael banished when Yitzchak was a baby? So
Yeah, when
didn't have
right,
this
he was.
conversation?
It doesn't mean that they never saw each other. He wasn't living anymore with Avram. Doesn't mean that he disappeared from the face of this earth. But he was. Doesn't mean Avram never saw him after that. But he wasn't. They weren't living, together, and he wasn't having that direct, contact all the time on a regular basis. So the problem with the first one is that it was 35 years ago, and the pasuk says achar, which means right afterwards, and that's not right afterwards. What's the problem with the second one? What's the problem with the second one? We're calling this a test of whom?
Who's Abraham?
Of Abraham. And this conversation happened between, was it with Abraham or was it with Yitzhak?
It was with Abraham.
Right. The test is supposed to be with Avraham, and this conversation is with Yitzchak. So he says it's not so good either. This also has a little bit of, but they complement each other. Because the first one is more emphasis on Avraham, whose test it really is. That's why it's put first. But it has the problem of the time. So we have the second one where the time fits in better, but the problem is the person is not so perfect. And together, they complement each other and everything works out. So in short, Hashem thought about doing it after his conversation with the Satan, saying that Avraham, isn't so loyal, and Hashem is going to prove that he is loyal. And then we have when Hashem decides now's a good time to do it after the conversation of Yitzchak and Yishmael.
But the conversation that Yitzhak had with Avraham caused their rift.
Not with Avraham, with Yishmael.
No, I think because of the binding of Yitzhak, Avraham and Yitzhak had a falling out. Like, how could you do this? I'm your son.
Right. So we're gonna discuss that. That's excellent. We will do some commentaries on that point when we get to those passages. Right now, we're only on the first passage where Hashem is just commanding it, and Yitzchak doesn't even know it exists. So when we get there, we'll address that. That's a good question. Yes, Susan.
I somehow the Yetzirah has to be brought into this conversation, because the Yetzirah within the humans has to be acknowledged. And I think Hashem didn't want to bring it saying that everyone has a Yetzirah. He wanted to bring it as that Satan was subservient to Hashem. In other words, that evil inclination was part of the whole thing. It had to be brought to the front, I think. Right.
So that's a good point. That's a lesson to us. That the Satan tries to come in and say, you're not really serving God, you're really not dedicated. And we have to say, no, we are dedicated, and we're going to prove it to you.
Right, it's a test for all humans, and
yes,
it had to be brought to Avraham.
Yeah. That's what we're going to discuss next, is this idea of being a test, and it doesn't have to be a test so severe as this, but what does the Torah say about a test? And every day we have tests, small ones, big ones, and how that's why it's so essential. And that's one of the reasons I'm picking this topic next, is because this is giving us the tools of how to withstand, and what is a test, and how do we withstand a test, because this is what happens to us every day. Because we said Adam and Chava brought in, evil into the world. Now we have free choice. Now we have good and bad, and we have to choose. So now, practically speaking, okay, when I'm given a test, so we learn from Avraham, our first father, we're going to learn a lot about that. So in this first Rashi, we see the theme of the whole topic. A lot of times the first Rashi gives you kind of like a preview. And we said there were two answers. And one answer was more emphasizing Avraham, and one answer was more emphasizing Yitzchak. Now, Avraham came first because mainly the test is for him. But it says that the self-sacrifice was really for both Avraham and Yitzchak. And that's why we're starting off in the first Rashi saying, yes, this is self-sacrifice. And it is self-sacrifice for both Avraham and for Yitzchak. So now we're going to go into the next words of the passage. And the next words of the passage are right over here. Va'elekim nisa es Avraham. Hashem tested Avraham. Okay. So what do we see with these words? With these words, we see a tremendous, tremendous thing. We see what's the introduction to this whole thing. After these things, okay, what prompted this to happen? The story with the Satan or the story with Yishmael. And what's his very first words? What's his introduction? His introduction is God is testing Avraham. You need to know this. This is a test. That's first and foremost. This is clearly a test because before any of the story, Hashem is telling you this is a test. Like, this is not regular life. This is not normal that Hashem is saying, go take your only son and sacrifice. It's not something you should learn to do. I'm telling you right now, this is a test. This is not regular, okay? So now what we're going to delve into is what is the purpose of a test? And there's so many commentaries on this. And we're going to do a whole bunch of commentaries explaining what is a test, okay? And so we're going to do that for the next, couple classes or so. The next few classes, we're going to just be discussing what is a test. The way it works a lot of times is the commentaries are like top heavy. It's like on the first passage, there'll be like so many commentaries, and then it gets lighter because this is the theme, like test. So they're all like, I have so much to say on this. This is so important. This is so essential. And then we could kind of just like go through quickly some of the other passages because it's not such an essential question and it's not such an essential point. But this is so applicable to us. We're really going to spend a lot of time on this of what is a test so that we can have the tools how to pass all our tests, whether they're small or big, whether it's like, should I smile at the person or just ignore them? It doesn't have to be like a huge test or a really big challenging test. Yes, Susan.
One thing in the Art Scroll Tanakh, in the back, it says the 10 trials of Abraham instead of the word test, which for me is even more serious because a trial is something you can either pass or fail. I mean, there's no two ways about it. A trial is a trial. And
right.
That makes it even heavier for Avraham, for me anyway.
Yes.
The word trial.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point that they use that
particular word,
Yeah, that particular word. Okay, so just bear in mind that the reason why we're spending so much time is because that really applies to all of us. As we keep on talking about, Torah comes from the word Hira'ah, to teach. It's a lesson. This is not a history book. This is our life. It's applicable to every single day. It never, ever goes out of style. And it's amazing how sometimes I'm like, this is like modern psychology. This is like everything is in the Torah. You just have to look deeper if you can't find it. And it has so many tools for us. And that's really what we want to take from this. We want to we don't want to just learn about it as an intellectual pursuit. Of course, that's enjoyable to learn different intellectual things, but we also really want to connect it with us. And we want to sometimes stop and say, let me think about this and let me feel it. Let me feel it as a part of my life. How could I incorporate this into my life? So we're going to start with the Ramban, which is Nachmanides. And this is a very famous Ramban because, like I said, it's not just about this. It's not just about this specific topic. This idea that he's telling us about being tested is for all tests. It's not just for this test. And he actually speaks in a very general way, not really talking much about Avraham, but just talking about tests to make it applicable for each and every one of us. And so he says the purpose of a test is really for the good of the one being tested. And he explains that. He says, a test means that a person has absolute free choice to do it or not to do it. And Hashem gives the test to take it from potential to actuality. So in other words, you might say oh, I could run 5 miles. You could, but are you? I could be really patient and kind, but are you? So when Hashem gives you that instance, that test, then you have to pull it out of yourself and you have to bring it from potential. I'm able to run 5 miles. I'm able to be patient. I'm capable of whatever it may be, but now I'm actually doing it. And until you have a test, why should I do that? I don't need to exercise that. I don't need to do that. So Hashem gives the test to take it from potential to actuality, so he can give a reward for the action. So that's why it's for the good of the person, because now it's brought out. Now I actually did it. No one's getting credit for I can do it. I'm getting credit for I did do it. And then you get rewarded. So you get to actually accomplish whatever it is. And B, you get rewarded. You can't get rewarded just for having a good heart. Just for, I would want to do that. You get rewarded for what you actually did. So it's for the good of the one being tested, therefore. And Hashem only gives, the next point he brings is so important. I always think about this constantly, because I learned this many years ago, and it always stays with me. And that is that Hashem only gives a test to the person if he can handle it. He talks about giving the test to the righteous one. Righteous doesn't mean, a tzaddik, someone who never sins. It means someone who's righteous, someone who could act righteous in this event. Someone who has the capabilities to actually do it. He does not give you a test you can't handle. So if I have this test, it means I can pass. I can pass. It's up to me. I have free choice. It's not easy. It's challenging. Look at Avraham, going against everything you believe, sacrificing your most beloved thing. But you have it in you to do it. You can do it. So different people get different tests according to their potential, according to their capabilities, according to their situation. But if I got this test, it means I can handle this. I have the capabilities of passing it and giving Hashem that joy, that satisfaction that I chose the right thing. And you could pass 100%. You could do it. You could do it. So what lesson do we have here? I want everyone to, as I said before, to stop, to think, and to feel this, meaning to apply it. So if everyone could just take out a piece of paper for a minute and just jot down, stop. We're pausing for a minute now. And I want everyone to think and to feel this, meaning to apply this to your life, and maybe just jot down, one thing of a situation, a test that you have that maybe you think you're not capable of passing. And hey, you know what? Let me think about this for a minute. Maybe I am capable, and maybe I just need to do X, Y, and Z. Or you know what? I was so upset when Hashem gave me this test. But now I realize it's for my good. I'm going to become a stronger person from this. We learned this from the Chauffeur. We're going to, not quite yet, but, Elul, we start blowing the Chauffeur. And on Rosh Hashanah, we blow the Chauffeur. And we start off with a very, like a very strong, nice, smooth sound. Then we go on to the next thing where it goes, do, 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 like 3 sounds. And then we chop it up even more into 9. Do, 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 do. So it says this is compared to like a person when they're born. When you're born, right? When you're born, what happens? Everything is smooth. Life is very nice for the baby. Just do smooth sailing. And then you start getting challenges, but they're not so bad. But then as life goes on, it gets really choppy and it's more of a roller coaster. You're like bumping through. But what's the last sound that we do on Rosh Hashanah? We do we start off with tekiah, a smooth sound, but we end off not with a tekiah, but with a tekiah gedolah, so instead of ending off do, we end up do, like longer and smoother. And it says you start off like a baby, smooth. Then you have challenges and they make you stronger, and you have more challenges, and you end off not the way you started, but stronger. So, right, that you start, smooth with your tekiah, and you end off with the tekiah gedolah, meaning that challenges make you stronger. My grandmother likes to say that, someone asked, how did you become so successful? And the man answered, through experience. So he says, well, how did you get experience? He said, through making mistakes. Through the challenges. That's how I became successful. You can't just become successful without having tests and challenges. So in the beginning, we're like, oh, Hashem, why do you have to do this to me? It's not fair. But then we realize we become a better person. Now, of course, we do pray every day. Al tavi l'dei nisayon. Please don't bring me to a test. We don't ask for tests. But when Hashem gives us one, we don't want tragedies, God forbid. But when Hashem does give us, a test, a trial, we know we have the power to, so I'm just going to give 1 minute where everyone could kind of jot down, something that you could apply from this, what we just learned. Okay, so now we're going to continue.
Devorah, I have one question.
Sure.
Did the binding of Isaac come before or after Sodom and Gomorrah?
This came before, I want to say, but I'm going to double check that.
So it had to be after, because the angels that told Sarah she was going to have a son went on to Lot.
Yeah, meaning the story of Sodom and Gomorrah came before the binding of Isaac.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
All right. Now, if that is the case, then there is another case for Hashem, because Avraham challenged Hashem and said, God said, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Avraham challenged him and said,
if you find 50 righteous people, and then he went to 40 and 30 until he was down to 1.
Right. And he went to 10 and then down to 1. And but he challenged him every step of the way. So
yeah, that's a good strengthening of your question, and we will get to that point of why isn't he responding. One of the commentaries does address that. Yeah, we will get to that. So, okay, we don't have much time. I was going to start the next but we only have 1 minute left. So I'm just going to take Susan's question, and next time we will go into the next commentary. Yes.
Where is that explanation of the sound of the chauffeur? How would I find that? The way you described it, I couldn't write down everything you said because it was quick. You know, you said explain. I never heard that.
You know what? I don't know. I sort of threw that in as a story. Everything else I have sourced. You know what? I'm like officially teaching.
That's fabulous. The way
I don't
you
have that. But
it.
basically, the chauffeur has 3 basic sounds, and we start off with the tekiah, the first sound, trua, and shvarim. We start off with a smooth sound, then we go to 3 breaks, and then we go into 9 choppy sounds. So we start off smooth, and then it gets a little choppy.
I'll ask Google, Hebrew Google. I'll ask.
And then it gets more choppy, and we end off with a even instead of just a tekiah like it comes in the beginning,
right?
Which is smooth. It's called tekiah gedola. Gedola means big, gadol. So it's a even longer one because we end off, stronger. Okay. And that's actually compared to our history also. We start off, things were kind of smooth. We went through a lot of challenges. Right. And we're going to end off with Mashiach, which is going to be like the tekiah gedola, which is going to just be forever smooth. We're going to go even better than before. We started off with Adam, where things were smooth and good. And then we have all these different challenges that we're going to, with Noach and with Avraham and with Mitzrayim, Egypt and all. But then when Mashiach comes, we're going to end off strong, and forever, and even stronger than we were before the Garden of Eden. Everyone have a great day, and we will continue on Thursday. Have a wonderful day.
Oh,
thank you, Devorah. Thank you.
Tomorrow there's class.
Thank you, Devorah, Leah.
Stay safe, everyone.